Hello, and welcome to Chapter 1 for the Essentials of Human Anatomy and Physiology. If you would like, you can print these out ahead of time or you can take notes as you are listening, but these would be genuinely very useful and they do coincide with the book. So, to start off with, when we talk about anatomy and physiology, we have to actually define anatomy and physiology. So, anatomy, if it's broken down, Ana means up and tomi means cutting. So this literally translates to cutting up. And so anatomy by definition is the study of the structure and the shape of the body in relation to its parts. And so we can do this in observation to see sizes and relationships beyond just sort of an observation, if you will. So when we discuss the idea of anatomy, you're thinking about all of the bones within the body. There are 206 bones in the body, but it's not necessarily just the bones. We also are looking at bony landmarks, little facets. We're going to discuss the idea of fissures and ridges, and we're looking at those structures. Same idea if you were thinking about like the cardiovascular system. We think about the heart, and there are four chambers of the heart. And within the heart, there are valves, and we have arteries and veins, and they have specific tissues that are going to be found within these structures. So, anatomy is focusing on the structure versus physiology. And again, just to give a little bit of background, if you ever see logy, Logy, logy means the study of. So this is the study of function. So physiology by definition is the study of how the body basically works. So how the body and its parts work or function. So again, anatomy was thinking of structure, physiology is thinking of function. So now taking back the idea of, again, the skeletal system, there are 206 bones in the body. There are bony landmarks. Those landmarks actually give rise to a specific function. Maybe it's a landmark for where a muscle will attach, or maybe where a nerve or blood vessel will run through. In the cardiovascular system, again, we think of the four chambers of the heart to help with pumping action, and there's valves to prevent backflow. So anatomy and physiology actually work together because structure relates to function. And so we have to have anatomy and we have to have physiology. And so we will somewhat separate them to sort of give differences between the two, but we have to talk about them together. So here's a little example for you. The air sacs of the lungs, they are called alveoli. You will hear about that later on when we discuss the respiratory system, but they have very, very thin walls. Their tissues are something called a simple squamous epithelium. And the reason that they are very, very thin from a structural perspective is it enables them to be able to provide gas exchange, which is the function. So we want to have gas exchange. We want to be able to pick up oxygen and take that to our tissues, and we want to drop off carbon dioxide. If you had a very thick walled alveoli, that gas exchange couldn't take place. So structure greatly relates to function. And so make sure not only can you define anatomy and physiology, make sure you can give some examples as well. Now, when we discuss the idea of anatomy and physiology, we first have to talk about the levels of organization. And so there are 6 levels that we're going to discuss. From the first perspective, we're thinking about chemical levels. So I apologize in advance if you're not a chemistry fan. Unfortunately, we will be talking about chemistry in chapter 2. So this is where atoms fall in. And atoms are going to be the smallest sort of unit, if you will, from a chemical level. Within atoms, we'll talk about protons and neutrons and electrons, but they're very, very tiny little specific pieces of matter. And so when we discuss atoms, we think of like hydrogen, we think of oxygen atoms, we think of neon, we think of sodium atoms. And what can happen is we can actually put those atoms together to form molecules, and then we can form macromolecules. And eventually what will happen is we'll work our way up to a cellular level. So at a cellular level, now we have many different functioning cells. We have hair cells, muscle cells, skeletal cells. They're all important in their own way. And again, this is going to be the sort of smallest unit of life, if you will. When we discuss a cell, we say it's the smallest unit of life. Now, if you put two of the same cells together, basically, if you will, in similarity, they're going to become a tissue. There are four main types of tissues that we will discuss. We're going to discuss epithelial, muscle, connective, and nervous tissue. And they all have a very specific function associated with them. If you put two or more tissues together, we form an organ, such as your stomach, your small intestine, your kidney. And if you have organs that are similar, and they're similar in their function, for instance, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, rectum, you're going to create an organ system, such as the digestive system. And we have several several organ systems that form together to create an organism. And an organism is us. Now, this can continue on from a biological setting. We can actually keep moving and start talking about the ecosystems and biospheres. But for this class, we will stop at organism. We will stop at you. So just to kind of bring this all together, again, there are 6 main levels that we're going to talk about. We first think about that chemical level, and again, we think of atoms. So for instance, here, what they are showing you are different types of atoms. This could be hydrogen, this could be oxygen, this could be sodium. And what's going to happen is they're going to chemically combine to form molecules. From there, molecules are going to turn into bigger molecules called macromolecules. And eventually what they'll do is they'll form something called organelles. Organelles are going to be these very small components of a cell. Then we're moving on to this cellular level. And the cellular level, again, is where we're going to see different types of cells. So in this example, they're showing you a smooth muscle cell in particular. And again, we have different types of cells. We have skeletal muscle, smooth muscle cells. We have hair cells. We have epithelial cells. And when you put these guys together, they're going to consist of a tissue. A tissue basically consists of similar cell types. So now what we can see here is that we actually have a smooth muscle tissue. We have combined several different smooth muscle cells to end up forming this tissue. Once we've formed this tissue, we can now create an organ. And in this particular example, we are showing you connective tissue, epithelial tissue, smooth muscle tissue. They're going to combine to create a blood vessel. And a blood vessel is an organ, believe it or not. It's an organ of the cardiovascular system. When we think of arteries and veins, they are very much an organ. And again, they're an organ by definition because they are composed of different types of tissue. And if you put multiple of these blood vessels together, again, you create an organ system. So this would be the cardiovascular system. We're seeing the heart and we're seeing blood vessels, such as arteries and veins, as well as something called capillaries that we will discuss further on down the road. And like I said, if you combine the organ system, like the cardiovascular system, digestive system, respiratory system, they will all create an organism. And you are that organism. So we are made up of several different types of organ systems. So make sure not only do you understand the specific levels that we're seeing, make sure you can put them in order and make sure, again, you can define them. Now we're going to discuss the idea of organ systems. This is going to be a very straight overview, if you will, because what will end up happening throughout our course is we will start diving in deeper to each specific system. And we will start with what is known as the integumentary system. The integumentary system is sort of the system that folks forget about, and it's because of the name being so funny. But this is your hair, skin, and nails. This forms your external body covering. And again, we have to include hair and we include your nails as well. What's so important about your skin in these coverings is it actually helps to waterproof the body, as well as it's going to create a cushion for protection. Because remember, you have different tissues and you have muscles and bones and organs inside that are very important to us, and we want to prevent injury. So, having this integumentary system really does help to create an extra layer of cushion and protection. Not only that, it also helps with the production of vitamin D, and we get that through sunlight. It also helps with excretion as well. One of the important pieces of being human is that we have to be able to excrete waste products, and we can excrete salt when we sweat. It also is going to help us to regulate our body temperature as well. We're going to discuss in detail here very soon something called homeostasis. And homeostasis is a balance, if you will. It's an internal balance that is very important. And it basically keeps us at this sort of perfect level or perfect range, if you will. And so body temperature, for instance, is extremely important. We want to make sure we can regulate this, that we're not too hot and we're not too cold. And the integumentary system can help with that. Again, we sweat when we're hot and we shiver and shake, and the hair on our arms stand up when we get cold. And so again, that helps with the body temperature homeostatic balance. Not only that, we also have nerve receptors within our skin. They're called cutaneous nerve receptors. And what they do is they help us with sense of touch, they help us with pain, they help us with temperature modifications. And so again, it allows us to have some sort of response to our external environment. And then we can also share that with our internal environment to say, hey, I felt something, someone touched me, or something grabbed me, or something hurt me. And it allows us to make a decision based upon whatever that receptor was telling us. All right, so this would be your integumentary system. This will be the first system that we will discuss. And again, you can think of hair, skin, and nails. Moving on from there, we'll talk about the skeletal system. So the skeletal system obviously consists of bones. As I said before, in the adult skeleton, there are 206 bones, but we also have cartilage, ligaments, and joints that are also going to be part of that. When we think of the organs involved, we are thinking about those components as well. We still have to think about joints. We still have to think about ligaments and tendons on top of the bones. And when we think about the skeletal system, it's our framework. It provides an area for muscles to attach, so that way we can have movement. If we didn't have bones, we would literally be a sack of meat on the ground, and we wouldn't be able to have the movement that we do. Not only does it allow for muscle attachment to take place, it also is going to be protection for our vital organs. So if you think about it, your sternum or your breastbone, if you will join with the ribs in order to protect your thoracic cavity. In your thoracic cavity, we have the heart and we have the lungs. If you think about your vertebrae in the back and your spine, that's going to help to protect your spinal cord. So we have various bones aligned in a certain way to really help to protect those vital organs. Not only that, again, when we think about the skeletal system, we'll also discuss what's called hematopoiesis, which is blood cell formation. Believe it or not, you actually have blood cell production happening within your bones. It's happening within what's called the red bone marrow. And we'll discuss that further on, so you don't have to memorize that today. But it also helps with storage of minerals such as calcium and phosphate and other very important components that we will need and will actually be stealing and kind of bringing back, if you will, this, again, another homeostatic balance throughout our lifetime. So that is the skeletal system. And again, here we can see the very important components, the cartilage, the joints, the bones, and again, you can see down at the bottom the function. Moving on from there, we will discuss the muscular system. Muscular system kind of makes sense. It's going to help with muscles. And when we think about our skeletal muscles, this allows for contraction. So they will either elongate or they will shorten, and it allows us to move. We have mobility now. So those bones that we had before that we allow for that attachment and framework now allows us to produce movement. On top of that, it also allows us to generate heat, and we'll discuss that a little bit more later on. So when we discuss the skeletal muscles, there are over 600 muscles in the adult human body. We will not learn that many. We will learn about 40 of them. So just as a heads up, but you will understand where they are located, sort of the more what we call superficial muscles we'll discuss. So the ones that are kind of up front and center, if you will. But we will also discuss their function as well. Not only will we discuss the muscles, we'll discuss the function behind those muscles. And then finally, we'll move on to the nervous system. So the nervous system has to basically operate with all of our other systems. It is a control system. Now, the nervous system will be broken down into two components. There's a central nervous system and what's called a peripheral nervous system. We'll discuss that more in detail in a few weeks. But we have the brain, we have the spinal cord, we have lots of nerves, and we have receptors that are going to be making up this nervous system. And the nervous system's job is to respond to stimuli. Remember, you're gathering information from the internal environment as well as that external environment. And so again, we have receptors that allow us to pick up this information, and then we send it to basically the brain and spinal cord, mostly the brain, to say, okay, what do we do with this information? How do we act on it? And they have to respond accordingly. So if your hand was on a hot stove, we don't want your hand to sit there for long periods of time and say, oh, that's kind of hot. Wonder what I should do. No, we want you to go and immediately move your hand. That's based upon the nervous system. Same thing if you were to step on a tack, or if you were to see a ball coming at your face, or again, when we're driving and we see other cars, or maybe we see deer in the road, we have to respond very much accordingly. So the brain not only has to pick up this information, it has to be able to understand what the information is that's being told, and again, create an appropriate response. Now, the sensory receptors detect changes. So again, this is the one that will detect change in pressure, in heat, in pain, and they send those messages to what is known as the central nervous system, or we will call it the CNS. The CNS consists of the brain and spinal cord. So again, you have these sensory receptors picking up information. They send it to the brain and spinal cord and say, okay, what do we do with this? And then from there, they have to assess the information and basically provide feedback of, okay, what do we do next? And that activates what are known as effectors. And effectors are going to be muscles and glands. So again, if your hand was on a hot stove, we need to be able to say, hey, that's hot. We need to move your hand. Otherwise, you're going to burn your hand. So then the muscles involved will have us actually move our hand. Or again, if you were to have a ball be thrown at your face. The sensory aspect is, okay, I see this image coming at me. What is this? The brain has to make that decision that, okay, this is a ball. It's coming at you fast. You have two options. You can duck or you can actually grab the ball. And then based upon that response, your muscles will either try to grab it or you're going to duck, depending on what's taking place. So we'll discuss this way more in detail in a couple of weeks, but this is the nervous system overall. And here you can see again, there is the brain, the spinal cord, nerves, and the sensory receptors. The CNS, the central nervous system, consists of the brain and spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system, also known as the PNS, and I would like to say it like that because PNS makes people laugh, would be the nerves and then the receptors that we'll discuss later on. So, but for right now, just know brain, spinal cord, nerves, sensory receptors fall into the nervous system aspect. And then finally, what will happen is we'll discuss the endocrine system. So the nervous system and endocrine system actually really do function together. But what the endocrine system does is it secretes hormones. Hormones are very, very, very important to the body. And so I actually love to discuss the endocrine system. So we will spend quite a bit of time talking about the endocrine system and why it's so important to understand these hormones and how they're secreted into the blood. They do not ever leave the body, hence the name, the endocrine system. They don't have ducts, so they actually travel within our blood or within our tissues. And we have several different types of hormones. Some are going to help with growth and reproduction. Some help with nutrients. Some help with circadian rhythm and sleep. Some help us with our actually our mood swings and behaviors. So we will discuss the endocrine system in way further detail later on. But there are some very specific endocrine glands. So some that you have probably heard of are the pituitary gland and the thyroid gland. Those tend to be the very famous ones that we know because we tend to have issues and actually see a lot of diseases based upon pituitary gland and the thyroid gland. The pituitary gland is found within the brain, and this one is going to help us with growth hormone. This one actually helps us to drive up our thyroid gland. This one helps with something called oxytocin, which is going to help with labor as well as for milk production. We have prolactin that also helps with milk production. So very important little gland there. The thyroid gland will be found in the neck. And behind the thyroid gland, or I should say on the back of the thyroid gland, there are 4 little buttons called the parathyroid hormones or the parathyroid gland. Biologists, as you can tell, or anatomists are not that creative with their names, but they basically sit on the back. The thyroid kind of looks like a little bow tie, and there's 4 little buttons on the back of that bow tie that are the parathyroid glands. The adrenal glands will sit above the kidneys. They look like little top hats. The thymus, we're going to find more in like the sternal area. This is really helpful with immune defense. The pancreas actually has dual function. So we also discuss the pancreas quite a bit because of diabetes. So diabetes is an endocrine disorder. This is an issue within the endocrine part of the pancreas. But the pancreas also functions in the digestive system as well. And that's going to sit in the abdominal cavity. And I'll show you where that sits very, very soon. We also have the pineal or pineal gland, depending on sort of your instructor. This also sits in the brain as well. And this helps with circadian rhythm and sleep. And then finally, you have the gonads, depending on if you're male or female. You'll have ovaries if you're a female, and then you would have the testes if you were male. So those are considered what we call the gonads. So these are the glands of the endocrine system. There are quite a many of them, but we will discuss them again in way more detail coming up in a few weeks. But their ultimate goal, secrete hormones into the blood. From there, we'll talk about blood and we'll discuss the cardiovascular system. Sometimes, depending on the textbook, you may hear circulatory system. And because of the fact that depending on the publisher and what class you take, they'll call it the cardiovascular system or the circulatory system. So you may hear me use them interchangeably. So just as a forewarning, circulatory, cardiovascular, they're going to go in the same boat. But the cardiovascular system consists of the heart and consists of the blood vessels. So cardi, if you see C-A-R-D-I, cardi, that means heart. And then the vascular is referring to the blood vessels. So you have your heart, you have your arteries, veins, and what are known as capillaries. And their functions are going to be different depending on if you're talking about the heart or whether or not you're talking about the blood vessels. The function of the heart is to pump blood. And they're going to pump blood all through these blood vessels. And the blood vessels are going to transport blood to the tissues and back to the heart. So we are constantly feeding our tissues brand new oxygenated blood, and we're taking back what is known as deoxygenated blood or low oxygenated blood. And when we think about blood, we think about its functions. It's transporting oxygen, which is vital for us. It's also going to be helping to remove carbon dioxide. we'll be moving nutrients as well as, again, those hormones that we picked up through the endocrine system. And so blood also contains other little functions as well. Not only does it contain red blood cells that are going to be useful for oxygen and carbon dioxide carrying, we also have white blood cells that are going to help with our defense system. And we're going to have platelets, which are going to help with blood clotting. And we'll have other chemicals that help to provide protection, help with inflammation, and sort of just bring this all together as a functioning unit. So again, when we think about the cardiovascular system or the circulatory system, we think about the heart and we think about blood vessels. And again, we do make mention of blood in this sort of mixture, if you will. We'll talk about blood first. So we'll go with from endocrine to blood, and then we'll make mention of the cardiovascular system. From there, we will discuss immune defense, and this is where the lymphatic system comes in. So the lymphatic system includes lymphatic vessels like lymph nodes, different lymphoid organs. We'll talk about what are called Peyer's patches, and we'll discuss tonsils. And basically, this complements the cardiovascular system. So if you notice when we discuss these systems, they'll sort of be in a trend to keep you kind of understanding and again, sort of feeding off of the foundation that we'll be laying every week. Because what will happen with the cardiovascular system is it's going to return these leaked fluids back to the bloodstream. So you have a cardiovascular system that, again, is pumping blood and allowing for oxygenated blood to get to our tissues, picking up what's known as deoxygenated blood and taking that back to the heart. But while this is happening in your blood, you have specific fluids. And these fluids are going to travel into the lymphatic system. And so basically what they're doing is they're double checking the blood to make sure there's not any funny infections or maybe something that shouldn't be there. And in this portion, we'll find white blood cells that help with our immunity. And they're going to help to see if there's any foreign objects or foreign invaders that we would need to take care of. So if you look at the lymphatic system, sometimes you'll also hear it called the immune system. Technically, they are a little bit different, but again, depending on text, they may use them interchangeably. You are going to see that we have lymph nodes kind of scattered throughout the body. The lymph nodes kind of look like the little lima beans, all sort of scattered throughout. And again, they're just sort of circulating to make sure that, again, that leaked fluid, just checking in on it, making sure everything's good. There's not an infection going on. There's no bacteria. There's no virus. There's no fungal infection. And then it can travel back to the cardiovascular system. Finally, we're going to start talking more about gas exchange, and we'll discuss a little bit more about excretion. So the respiratory system is what we're going to think about in terms of breathing and also removal. So the respiratory system has two parts. There's an upper and a lower respiratory system. The upper respiratory system is going to be your nasal passages. So we think about your nose, we think about the nasal cavity. We'll also hear the term pharynx, which is your throat, the larynx, which is going to be like the voice box. And then we'll start moving down into the lower respiratory system with the trachea. And the trachea are going to be these little ring cartilages. We'll hit bronchi, and then eventually we'll discuss the lungs. And so these are the major parts of the respiratory system. We'll get into more detail later on. From an anatomy perspective, there's a lot going on in the respiratory system, just as a forewarning. But again, it will make sense when we start discussing function. But the ultimate goal is that we'll have gas exchange take place. So again, we want to supply our body and our tissues with oxygen. We need oxygen from a cellular perspective in order to be able to do work and to be able to function properly. On top of that, we also want to remove waste product, and high volumes of carbon dioxide is not good. So we need to remove carbon dioxide while supplying our body with oxygen. Now, as a little side note, we never remove all the carbon dioxide. We actually do need a little bit, but we want to remove excess. So while we are picking up oxygenated blood and taking it to our tissues and making sure that our tissues have a sufficient oxygen, we are removing that excess carbon dioxide waste and being able to remove it. All right, so here are the major organs of this respiratory system. And again, we will get into way more detail later on with this guy. Thinking again, when we discuss kind of the idea of elimination, we'll also be discussing absorption here as well. We think about the digestive system. The digestive system's goal is that we are going to take in food. We're going to break down that food. We'll get the nutrients that we need, and whatever we don't use, we're going to lose. So the digestive system, again, from an anatomical perspective, has a lot going on. Not only does it have a lot going on from an anatomy perspective in terms of structure, a lot going on in terms of function. So again, a physiology or physiological approach. We have lots of different components here. But we'll first start off in the mouth. And when we discuss the digestive system, we think of this giant long tube called the alimentary canal, and it runs from your mouth to your anus. So you think of the mouth, the esophagus, the stomach, your small intestine first, then the large intestine, the rectum, and then the anus. And then there are some accessory organs that are going to aid in digestion and absorption along the way, such as the liver, the pancreas, the gallbladder. They're very important and they are very much needed in the digestive system. It just so happens that food doesn't run through it, so we call them accessory organs. But you do need them. They are very important for function. And like I said, the digestive system's goal is to break down food, and it also allows for the absorption of nutrients. So when we break down the food into smaller components, remember, we're kind of thinking macromolecule, and we're breaking them down into these tiny little molecules. Those little tiny molecules are good for absorption. They go into our blood. And once they travel into our blood, now our cells can actually use them. And then whatever we don't use, we're going to lose, and we're going to go through that elimination, or what we know as defecation. And we'll have it come out as feces. So here's a nice little picture of that alimentary canal. So they're showing you the actual tube. And again, it runs from the mouth down to the anus. And like I said, there are some accessory organs involved in there. They just don't happen to carry food. Finally, we'll discuss the urinary system, and then our last system will be the reproductive system. So the urinary system, again, is very important in terms of filtration as well as elimination. So the urinary system, from, again, an anatomical perspective, is not too bad. You have the kidneys, you have what are known as the ureters. They're like these little tubes that connect to the kidneys, and they drain urine to the urinary bladder. From there, the urinary bladder will then basically allow for urination to take place, and it will come out the urethra. And that's going to be what kind of complements the outside world. But its goal is to filter our blood. So there are lots and lots of blood vessels within the kidneys, and they're going to help with the filtration of blood. They eliminate waste. They help to actually maintain our pH, or what's called acid-base balance. They help with electrolyte balance and water balance, as well as it helps with regulation of blood pressure. So from an anatomy perspective, the urinary system isn't going to be too bad. From a physiology perspective, this is probably going to be one of the harder topics. So just as a forewarning, the urinary system I love. It is a little bit of work in the physiology kind of direction. So just to give you a heads up, there won't be so much from an anatomy perspective, but there will be a lot from the physiology perspective. And here you can see it. We have the kidneys, and right on top of the kidneys, I don't know if you can really see it in this picture here. There's these little top hats. Those are those adrenal glands from the endocrine system. So they help with hormone production. But then we can see our kidneys. We can see the urethra, or the ureters, those little tubes, and they're going to drain to that urinary bladder. And then finally, the urine will come out the urethra. And then finally, we discuss the reproductive system. So we have the male and female reproductive system. For males, we're going to see that they have a testes, or they have two testes, which is actually going to be part of that endocrine system and reproductive system kind of mixed together. They're housed in what is known as the scrotum. We will also see the penis, which actually is considered to be the accessory organ, if you will. The primary organ is going to be the testes. Secondary would be the penis. We also do have some accessory glands, like the prostate gland, seminal vesicles, and then we have some duct systems as well to help with basically movement of sperm and semen. For females, again, the primary organ will be the ovaries, and then the accessory or secondary organs would be like the fallopian tubes. I apologize in advance. We will use the term uterine tube. No one ever uses the term uterine tube, but uterine tube and fallopian tube go hand in hand. We also have the uterus, and then we have the vagina as well. For males, the function is to produce sperm. For females, it's to produce eggs. For males, again, they have to be able to move that sperm and be able to basically move it from the inside world to the outside world. And for the females, their job is to pick up that sperm, fertilize an egg, and then allow for the development of a potential fetus. All right, so here's a nice little picture of the two between the different body systems. So again, we can see those organ systems for the male and the organ systems for the female. All right, here we're going to take a little bit of a break. So I'm going to do a part 1 and part 2 for this video. I hope that this has made sense so far. If you have any questions, go back and review. Otherwise, continue on to the next video. All right, thank you guys and have a wonderful day.